So welcome back to another episode of the examination series with Rick Anglis, former Chief Examiner for Orthopaedics. And this session is going to be all about the written exam. And so there's two written exams. We'll go through what's included in each one, what's being assessed from an examiner's point of view, the do's and don'ts, and how you might prepare for them specifically. So Rick, tell me about written paper 1 and 2. What does that mean for people who are coming into training for the first time and thinking about the exam?
So the first thing to say is that written paper 1 and 2 take place a month before the clinicals. So when we talk about a May exam, the writtens are actually held in April. And they're two exams held on the same day, one in the morning, one in the afternoon. They're essentially 2 hours of duration plus reading time. The first exam, which we call clearly written paper 1, is multi-choice in orthopaedics at the moment, and that involves 75 multi-choice questions, each of which has 5 responses. So there's a stem, a statement, and then there's five facts about that statement. So the stem might be regarding developmental dysplasia of the hip in children, and then there'll be 5 statements which are either true or false.
So each question is almost 5 questions.
Each question is almost 5 questions.
So for type X,
for 75 type X questions. So for 75 questions, there are 375 marking points that you can achieve or not achieve. So you don't actually pass or fail each question necessarily. You might get 3 out of 5 for that question, and then you make up other points in another question where you have a bit more familiarity. So,
and is that the whole part 1? Is that the whole written exam one?
Paper one.
One multi-choice exam.
So it's all done on computer. It's all marked by computer. So it's very much a multi-choice.
And for the writtens, does everyone come into one place to do that exam?
No, you do your writtens in your home state.
Okay.
So that's saves a bit of travel.
Okay. I guess what we'd be keen to understand as trainees is, what are you as examiners trying to learn about us in the first written exam, the MCQ? What's the what are you trying to pull out of us? What are you assessing?
People talk about assessment by the Miller's pyramid. So you've got type A knowledge, which is just broad rote learning type knowledge. Type B knowledge, which is an understanding of concepts, and then type C knowledge, where you can build a concept and build a synthesis and management plans and that sort of thing. So really, multi-choice questions have to be type A. They're really just facts. They're remembering things. It's very hard to extrapolate from a question in multi-choice and work out the answer. So really, you know it or you don't know it. So there's not a lot that we learn about the candidates from the MCQ other than they've got a breadth of knowledge, and that breadth of knowledge would then underpin subsequent performance.
Okay. And we talked before in the preparation video about what might be helpful for learning for that, but it's mainly, I guess, being current with the last 5 years or so of literature.
Yeah.
I guess reading books and learning in tutorials. Is that
so learning the curriculum as part of your general preparation allows you to then understand the literature, but the questions are taken from current literature.
Okay.
Yeah.
On that same link, what are the do's and don'ts? What are the things you should and shouldn't do in the MCQ exam? Do you have any practical tips?
It's an MCQ exam. I think most people have done a lot of them. You never leave anything blank. Even if you're guessing at something, you've got a 50-50 chance that you'll pick up a point.
Yep.
So always finish. Time management in the MCQs is really critical. Everyone has a different flow for how they do an MCQ. I think if you go through and do all the ones that you absolutely know first, and then don't go back and look at them again because you already knew them. But I think the main trick is time management. You just don't want to leave anything blank on that exam.
And I remember when I did the examination, and you can actually do a trial one online on the college website and do a demonstration which has the same software, so you can actually look and see what the interface looks like before your exam. Remember, you could flag little questions as well. So if you found one particularly difficult, you could flag it and then
come back to
it
Yep.
at the end, so you knew where you could put your time into it if you had
Yep.
any time left over to run through things.
Yeah.
All right, that's a good summary, I think, of the do's, don'ts, and the content, I guess, of the multi-choice exam. What is the written exam 2? Because that's not just one type of examination.
No, written exam 2 is a combination of 2 essays, which, if you're looking at time frames, nominally a half an hour each, and then 10 what we call ISOEs, which is illustrated short answer responses.
That was going to be my next question. Is
Yeah.
it an ISOE or an ISOE or an ISOE?
It depends.
What do the
on-
examiners
Do
say?
you say castle or castle or graph or graph?
But what do you say in the Court of Examiners? That would be the definitive truth.
It's a mixed bag.
Oh no.
It's illustrated short answer responses. There'll be an X-ray or a photograph, and then there'll be questions about that image, as to what the condition might be, or what you're seeing in the imaging, and then they flow through.
And are they essay-like answers or are they short answers?
Short responses. So point form responses are appropriate as long as there's justification for the point form. So you don't want to just do a list of things that this could be. You actually want to put it in some perspective. If you're looking at a bone lesion on an X-ray and you think, well, gee, it could be 1 or 3 or 4 different benign bone lesions, it would be useful to say, I think my most likely diagnosis is this one, but these other 3 could come into the differential diagnosis. Why I think it's the first one is this, these reasons. So give justifications for your answers.
And on that note, what are you trying to take out of us in that examination? What are you testing? Is it facts? Is it recall? Image recognition?
So that the ISORs are really more that type B knowledge. It's the ability to look at something and understand it, and some of the questions might have a bit of management in them, which is then going up into the type C of building a response, building a management plan. But most of it is your ability to see something with an orthopaedic content and understand it in the right context.
Yeah, okay. One of the questions I actually wondered when I was doing the exam, I thought if I got the first part of a question wrong, but then logically the second and third part, for example, my differentials or my treatment was correct for my wrong answer, do you get knock-on marks, do you know, or is it that you either get it or you don't?
Yeah, that's always been a problem with that format of question, and we try very hard not to have everything hanging on, so you can only have one right answer for the first bit, and then the subsequent responses diverge from depending on what you put down for that first answer. So we
you
try
actually write the questions in a way that it doesn't all hang on one diagnosis.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah. So if you've got a reasoned, rational reasoning for picking that first diagnosis, but it's actually not the diagnosis, and then all of your other subsequent responses are right, you're not going to get full marks for that question, but you may well pass the question because it flows, it's cogent and it actually makes sense. But again, the conditions are usually tried to be selected so that ambiguity is not there.
Yep. And what are the do's and don'ts for the ISORs, I guess?
Let's call them ISORs. Well, do's and don'ts: see lots of clinical scenarios. Again, in study groups, put up isolated pictures and have 1 or 2 or 3 questions that flow on from that. Get some of the consultants that you work with who have recently done the exam. I think that's important, to put together image banks and to just ask you questions. What is this? How do you interpret this image? What are you going to do about it? What's your aftercare? And just do lots and lots of those sorts of questions.
Okay. And the essays, any do's or don'ts, tips for the...
Yeah, the essays are a completely different skill set. So the essays are about reasoned, logical, very much higher order thinking. So they're very much based around that type C knowledge that you really can put together a synthesis. So the essays might have a scenario in them. They might have a difficult clinical case, and you're being asked to discuss prognosis or outcomes or consent for example, with parents or families or individuals. It might be that you're asked to write a medico-legal letter. It might be that you just ask standard questions. But there'll be things in the essay that make it a little bit, that you have to really think your way through them.
Okay. One of the things I wondered in the essay is you could write so much for each section. So I know we were taught that management means history, exam, investigations and treatment. But in your exam, you could write it like a Viva and say all the things you would look for when they walk and specific things. And also in management, you could write a whole essay about your approach to a particular operation and the technical steps and things like you would for an op cert. So I guess what's the main focus of that whole essay? What should we be focusing on? Is it about synthesis and bigger picture, or do you want us to go into depth on all those things?
You need to answer the question. So if the question has specific focus, then talk to that specific focus, and it really is in the wording of the question. There are no redundant aspects to the question. It's been very well worked out, down to the last comma, as to how that question should look and read. But really with an essay, again, it comes down to time management. You've got half an hour. I'd encourage people to do a draft. It's not that the draft is marked per se, but if you've mentioned something in your draft that you've forgotten to put into the body of the essay, it allows the examiner still to say, "Oh, look, they knew that.
Yep.
I can take that on board. They've actually written it in the draft."
But don't write such a long plan that you run out of time to write the essay.
It's
thinking 5
time
minutes,
management.
25 or...
Yeah, there's a whole background art to doing exams that you really need to stick to, and we're very aware of the fact that the last essays that most people wrote were back in year 12.
Yeah.
So the actual English aspects of the essay is not quite so important, although in the days where people were writing it by hand, we did need to be able to read things. It's now typed. There's always lots of spelling errors. There's lots of grammatical errors. But as long as the information's coming across, you don't get marked down for that.
Okay.
There's always a contention about whether you can do dot points in the essay, and the agreed thing from the Court of Examiners is that dot points, if they're illustrating a point, are reasonable. But you can't do a whole essay of dot points, because it's an essay, and
it's meant to be prose.
It's meant to be prose, but it's meant to be a way of communicating difficult concepts to an audience that is much the same as you're going to be doing reports. It's much the same as you're going to be doing in summaries of case notes and that sort of thing. So that it's a very important skill set.
Okay.
My advice for who you get to look at that is a bit different to my advice for the rest of the exam. For the rest of the exam, I think younger consultants who've recently been through the exam, who have an idea about how it's all formatted now, and can really teach you some of the exam performance art. For the essays, I think going to older examiners who've seen a lot, who can synthesise cases really well. Look for people who just put things together really well, who've got a lot of experience, and who remember essays. And I'd be lining some people up and get them to set essays, and you write them and get them marked and do as many as possible, because it's not a common skill set day to day for an orthopaedic trainee.
If you're timing it to half an hour, it's not that difficult to do 1 a week or 2 a week.
Yeah.
And I echo your thoughts on, I thought it was really helpful to get people to look at them throughout that time. I didn't get people to look at most of my essays, but I think at the very start I did, and in the middle and at the end again, because you don't want to just run off on your own track that might be misleading, or you might be writing too much about one section than the other. So it's good to have regular review, peer review, to keep you on track when you're practicing essays.
Yep, absolutely.